In this presentation, I will be focusing on Lynne Ramsay, a writer, director, and producer from Glasgow. As I will discuss, women, family, and grief play a massive role in her work, paving the way for topics such as gender and sexuality to present themselves through narrative and visual means, creating important feminist meanings in her films. This will be honed in on in her 2002 film, Morvern Callar, and You Were Never Really Here, from 2017. Morvern Callar. Grief and women's strength. Grief is a prominent part of the film and Morvern's character, guiding her decisions for the entirety of the runtime, which ultimately links to her experience as a woman. At the beginning of the film, Ramsay externally expresses Morvern's internal grief through setting, framing, lighting, and colour. In Figure 1, Morvern is framed against an open and desolate lake, the cold and harsh environment mirroring her deeper feelings of loneliness and grief. This is made more apparent through Figure 2, as prior at a party, Morvern is shot close up. Although surrounded by people, unlike in Figure 1, the same feelings of loneliness and grief are evoked through her blank facial expression, juxtaposing the warm red of the strobe light that encapsulates her and the others in the house, showing how initially Ramsay visually displays Morvern's deeper feelings as a woman. With Morvern's grief established, it is then used to uncover the underlying themes of women's strength and perseverance that surrounds the rest of the film. Morvern's strength in the face of grief can be identified firstly when she uses her husband's novel for her own gain and freedom. Simone de Beauvoir presents this idea where she says that a woman makes a man's projects, a man's cares, her own, in a way he could not imitate. I agree with de Beauvoir's point, as in this case, Morvern's boyfriend physically gives up through suicide before he publishes his own book. So physically, Morvern's actions are those that he could not imitate, showing initially that she has a certain strength that he did not have and couldn't imagine. All made even more impressive when we acknowledge her grieving process simultaneously. Again matching with de Beauvoir when she says that women deal with crisis, misery, and misfortune more energetically than their husbands. This is visually displayed by Ramsay later in the film in Figure 3, where Morvern, with the publishers, is again placed in a large and open environment. However, through her energetic way in which she has dealt with crisis, the landscape takes on a different meaning than before. The truly warm colours feel like they're hugging Morvern as opposed to alienating, and the open landscape links to a promise and women's perseverance and strength that encapsulates her character's journey, one that starkly juxtaposes the earlier, colder and hostile world which surrounded her. In this way, Ramsay creates a deeply feminist message within the film, that through the absence of a man, a woman can not only function, but energetically navigate life on her own with promise and strength, shown through the visuals and narrative. Visual pleasure and narrative cinema and femininity. Following on from grief and in turn, women's strength and perseverance in the film, I will now explore how Ramsay's formal filmic elements portray a sense of comfortable womanhood in Morvern's character. Laura Mulvey says that camera technology, as exemplified by deep focus in particular, and camera movements determined by the action of the protagonist, combined with invisible editing demanded by realism, all tend to blur the limits of screen space. The male protagonist is free to command the stage. This quotation, although being aimed at men, works seamlessly when looking at it from a woman's perspective through Morvern. In Figure 4, Ramsay uses deep focus in a realist and sensitive scene of Morvern in a bathtub which, as Mulvey states, works to blur the limits of screen space between Morvern and the audience. In this lens, it is Ramsay who lets Morvern command the stage, with Morvern showing the audience what she wants to show us, linking to her comfortability in her body as she isn't afraid to show us these transparent and intimate moments in her life. This is made even more apparent with Kathleen Cullen's point that Ramsay's use of sound and the silent gravity of her pictures magnifies subtle inner movements. Sound and image work in a kind of correspondence. In this way, the silence of the scene in Figure 4 is Morvern herself commanding and silently telling us of her comfortability as a woman in her own body. Ramsay using filmic method once more to evoke Morvern's true feelings as a woman on film, which would normally be controlled and constructed by men. Morvern's comfortability in her own body is amplified further in Figure 5, As outside the confinements and comfortability of her home and bath, Morven is shot from afar in a confronting yet distant lens, again with the realist use of deep focus by Ramsay, however outside in the cold from the point of view of a man on a boat. The whole shot is in slow motion, mirroring the gaze of the man whilst he watches Morven lift up her dress. However, in this case, Morven determines the camera movement, as she has him and us as the audience in her trance, through the use of slow motion. The physical distance between the man and Morven presents her as being on her own physical stage, where she is free to command this man, symbolizing wider audiences. Ramsay in this scene ironically uses Mulvey's male gaze, as although Morven is being watched voyeuristically, she is choosing this, while simultaneously looking down on the man in the boat, and thus looking down on general audiences who objectify women on screen. Identically, this links to Morven's comfortability in her own body, as she is presenting herself seductively to a man by choice, however physically free from men, through the death of her boyfriend and the distance between her and the man here, looking down on them together with Ramsay. Creating another strong message for women in the film, as Ramsay shows that they can command the screen like men have done for years on film, and express their comfortable femininity in the process. Morven and her sexuality. An extension to Morven's comfortable femininity can be made to her comfortable sexuality that she portrays through Care Freely, showing us her most intimate and sexual moments throughout. Ramsay visually, yet in this case Morven, lets us into her personal subjective world, where as displayed prior, she can command her own stage. Through Morven's established control of the visual language of the film, she creates her own subjective identity, one free from a label. This plays out in Figure 6, an identical shot to Figure 4, in the bath with Lana, where Morven is choosing to include Lana in her intimate frame, proving that Morven is comfortable enough in her own sexuality that she allows Lana and the audience into this moment that was initially reserved only for her. This, along with Figure 7, where Morven is trapped in the frame between Lana and a guy kissing, on the surface could be daunting and intimidating. However, the three are enveloped by a warm hue in close-up, Morven expressing this wholly private moment with comfortability, the scene cutting away before we see anything else, purposefully, as it adds to Morven's subjective identity and free sexuality that she is constructing herself, choosing when and where to show us the aspects that make up her image. Proven again when, after a night out, Morven has sex with a random guy in his hotel room. In Figure 8, the handheld camera movement mirrors the spontaneous decision that Morven has made, showing that she is not frightened to show us the act in its entirety and realistically through deep focus. However, her blank yet contemplative and sorrowful stare after they have sex silently begs the question of if it was something that Morven truly wanted, with her subsequent rash departure from the hotel the next day proving that she is shaken by this encounter. Yet again, Morven proving her comfortable sexuality, as she isn't scared to present it as a work in progress, with all three scenes working in unison to present a positive message in a film centering on women's experiences, as Ramsay lets Morven take the reins of the film and carve her own subjective path and sexuality through her commandment of the visuals. An important subverted message in light of the usual restrictions placed on women in film and their identities. You were never really here. The absence of the mother and Gretchen Bisplinghoff. In Never Really Here, Ramsay excellently breaks down common conventions of masculinity and parenthood, as Jo acts as the sole caregiver to Nina in the film, due to the death of her father and the absence of a maternal figure in her life. In Figure 10, during the conclusion of the film, Jo and Nina are enclosed in a seemingly standard wide shot. However, there is something slightly astray due to their off-center positioning in the frame. Bisplinghoff refers to Ian Kaplan's comment where she says that film is perhaps more guilty than other art forms of literalizing Freudian motherhood theory, which the off-center positioning of the pair draws attention to, as something is visually askew, mirroring the absence of a mother figure, as we may feel like there is someone missing, yet the pair blends seamlessly into the pristine setting like the others in the background. Ultimately through this, we do not question this obvious absence, subverting the literalizing of Freud's motherhood theory on film, as there physically isn't a mother present and Ramsay shows that she's aware, yet through the visuals, is unbothered by this contrasting fact. Further, the film continues to subvert motherhood on film, as it is Jo, a paternal figure, that relies on Nina, creating a contrast to Bisplinghoff, again, when she says that Sunset Boulevard stresses the importance of Norma's life without those relationships give a woman's life stability. In the same end sequence, Joe with Nina at last, however still unstable mentally, imagines killing himself through Nina's physical absence from the booth. A subverted idea to Norma's instability in Sunset Boulevard through the lack of children, as in Never Really Here, it is Joe who would be lost and without stability if Nina wasn't around, not the maternal figure. Figure 11 stressing this idea further as the brutal image of Joe bleeding out externally communicates how quickly affected mentally he is without Nina. Ingrained as the whole right side of the frame is empty, with a physical wall blocking him off to the other customers in the diner, manifesting physically and visually his feelings of emptiness and loneliness in his mind if Nina isn't around. Ramsay here stressing the importance of this paternal role for Joe's sanity through visual means, breaking down Freud's motherhood theory and subverting Bisplinghoff's article onto a man, not a woman, creating an important message that breaks down parental roles for women and men, sending the message that a man can rely on a child in the same way that a mother is societally supposed to, and even more so. Masculinity. On the surface, Joe is presented as a large, intimidating brute of a man. In Figure 12, this is shown in the way that his body fills almost the entirety of the screen, being mirrored twice, adding to his physical power. This is ingrained through Joe's violent and disconnected actions and thoughts that are portrayed throughout, working hand in hand with Figure 8 to create a violent and dominating image of masculinity in the film. Yet Joe's thoughts and actions are not fantasies of power, but agonized memories of powerlessness, as he was subject to physical abuse from his father as a young boy, something that has psychologically affected him. In this way, Sue Thornham tells us that Joe's violence is only there to accentuate his delicate masculinity at the hands of his past abuse, an idea I agree with to Figure 14, where at the beginning of the movie, Joe is suffocating himself. The extreme close-up in combination with Joe being suffocated creates a visual manifestation of Joe's claustrophobic powerlessness right from the start, with his power only being able to be reclaimed in his head, not in actuality, through his acts of violence throughout. Showing importantly how Ramsay breaks down common presumptions of masculinity in mainstream contemporary film, providing background to Joe's actions that come from a sensitive place, showing that as he can emulate his father's violent actions, he cannot then remain on the side of masculinity, aligning him more with feminine conventions to the visuals and narrative. I see this breaking down of masculinity on Ramsay's part to be expressed finally and fully without concern by the end of the film, where Joe cries on screen in Figure 13. In his head or not, the display itself is wholly emasculating by society's standards, made even more apparent through the wide shot and the slow and meditative way that the camera hugs onto Joe until the tears are shed, as if Ramsay is making a spectacle of Joe's display and coaxing out these tears herself. Society's expectations of men's emotional role are expertly expressed in Wolf's Orlando, where Orlando is trying not to cry. Do what she did to restrain them, the tears came to her eyes, until remembering that it is becoming of a woman to weep, she let them flow. This inequality stated so nonchalantly by Wolf bluntly backs up that through society's standards, men shouldn't cry. However, Never Really Here puts a stop to this, as Ramsay dismisses this societal fact entirely, ending Joe's circular journey of masculinity and surrendering his once close-up emotions purposefully to the audience by the end of the film, positively. In this way, Ramsay delivers a final opposing image to the previously violent and British Joe, one that openly speaks out against common presumptions of masculinity and how a man should express himself through visuals and narrative, showing how Ramsay finally and once again aligns her films with the breaking down of common gender roles. In conclusion, I have shown through engagement with Lynne Ramsay's works, Morven Caller and You Were Never Really Here, that Ramsay creates two contrasting films, one focusing on women's experience and one a man's, however both exploring each gender and issues relating to women through themes such as gender and family with focus, conveying that Ramsay is dedicated to discussing important issues of gender, sexuality and feminism in her film, and has done for years, backed up through her alignment with issues relating to module reading and my own secondary reading. Thank you for listening.